Okay, welcome back everybody. Thanks for joining me. This is going to be part 2 of my book. But before we get rolling on that, I'd like to ask a favor of y'all. I just checked this morning and I have 29 views, but only 8 likes. Does that mean 21 of you didn't like my book? The only way I have to know is for you to click that thumbs up button. The only way the algorithm knows that you enjoyed my book is for you to click that thumbs up button. The only way the rest of the world knows that my book's worth reading or listening to is for you guys to click that thumbs up button and say it's not a waste of their time to listen to this dude talk for an hour. So if you enjoyed it, click the thumbs up button. Not too much to ask. If I move up the algorithm, that means more people get exposed to it, and that's not a bad thing. The only way I know that you guys are liking it is by clicking the thumbs up button. Other than that, I know that you watched it. I can look at the analytics on my YouTube channel and see average watch time was 40 something minutes, but the rest of the world doesn't know. I know that a lot of you just tell me personally, because I know most of you personally. And so you tell me to my face that it was good, or you call me a dick for stopping in the fucking wrong spot. But the rest of the world doesn't know that. The rest of the world doesn't hear that. Leave a comment, say what you liked, say what you didn't. As a content creator, it goes a long way toward letting us know that you appreciate the effort. So that's pretty much all I got. So a little preface to this section of the book is it starts out with some song lyrics. Now I'm going to try to play the music and see if the YouTube criteria will allow me to post it. Since it's not a complete song, it may let me post it. It may not be copywritten. Or Man-O-War may just not give a shit whether or not somebody's trying to use their music, because it's really just free publicity, right? That's the way I see it. Some artists don't feel that way. I'm attempting in absolutely no way to claim anything but fucking love for Man-O-War's songs. I have no fucking copyright ownership. I have no claim to any of it. But, if you dig it, fucking listen to them. Even if it won't let me post it, fucking look it up and listen to them. They're worth a listen. Don't judge them by one song, though, because there's a variety. So I'm going to try to squeeze that by. If that doesn't squeeze by, then I'm going to have to read them. Not quite the same. Because the tempo of the music is important in the story. And you'll see why. In another part of the book, I had to think long and hard about whether or not, or how to go about doing it. Because you're going to be introduced to a lady who speaks with an Irish accent. Now, I don't do a really good Irish accent. Although I am Irish. I'm not Ireland Irish. I'm an American Irish. And I don't wish to insult my Irish brethren by a relatively poor representation of their dialect. So I'm just going to read it. Now, you'll probably hear a hint of Irish in there, simply because their sentence structure is different than ours. And it just kind of makes you sound a little Irish when you're using their sentence structure. I mean, no offense to any Irish person out there, but I'm not going to try to fake an Irish accent. And for those of you who are thinking I can just go ahead and sing the lyrics to the Man-O-War song, yeah, fuck a bunch of you. That's not going to fucking happen. I am absolutely never going to embarrass myself like that on YouTube. Just not going to happen. I don't drink that much. And if I did drink that much, I'd probably do the Irish shit too, but I'm not that inebriated. So it's not going to happen. Come over to the house, get me drunk. I'll sing right along with Man-O-War. Shit, I'll sing right along with Man-O-War even if I ain't drinking. But, I'm a backup singer, even if I am louder than they are. Anyway, I hope y'all enjoy it. So we're going to get rolling on it. Pull up a stump. Roll over a log. Sit on the dirt here. Let me continue my story.
Build a fire 1,000 miles away to light my long way home. I ride a comet, my trail is long to stay. Silence is a heavy stone.
His eyes snapped open as the second stanza of the first verse from Heart of Steel began to play.
I fight the world and take all they can give. There are times my heart hangs low. Born to walk against the wind, born to hear my name. No matter where I stand, I'm alone.
By the end of the third stanza, he'd yanked on his shorts, grabbed a sword, and was halfway to the backyard.
Stand and fight. Live by your heart. Always one more try. I'm not afraid to die. Stand and fight. Say what you feel. Born with a heart of steel.
The fourth stanza saw him on one knee in grass that never needed cut, both hands on his sword hilt, its point in the ground, and his forehead pressed against the crossguard as if in prayer. When the guitar kicked in, Anvil launched into motion. His sword was a blur in front of him and on both sides. His feet were almost always firmly on the ground. Occasionally, you'd see a front stomp kick, or a side kick to one side, always accompanied by a sword thrust to the opposite side. This was his dance. He always danced it to the music of Man-O-War. It seemed appropriate. He called it the Dance of Death. It was not the same dance he'd been taught years ago. He'd altered it to suit himself. The old form had much more fancy footwork and a lot of defensive moves. There was not 1 ounce of defense in his style. He saw no need to defend against dead people. He sought to kill quickly and move on. His sword always aimed at flesh, not at steel. He practiced every day without fail, without deviation, for at least 2 hours. Often, he would stop only to eat, spending all day honing his skill. The song changed again. It was now Black Wind, Fire, and Steel. That signaled his final set. He saved that song till last because the tempo demanded more speed from muscles already burning with fatigue. As the song started, a dog leapt the fence into his yard. He didn't pause or even slow down. He'd been aware of the dog since it entered his neighbor's yard and made a beeline straight for him. He was also aware of the 2 people who were following closely behind it. Crystal, with Amy and Sharon in tow. Crystal went straight to her belly after she came over the fence. She was used to his practice sections, of course, being his dog, and was confident that she wouldn't be cut in 2 by accident. But she also knew how Lily liked to be interrupted, so she just lay there, waiting. Sharon and Amy opened his back gate, took 1 step into his yard, and stood there as if frozen, shocked looks on both of their faces. The song was drawing to a close, and he started a pattern he called the Defender's Advance. If it were slowed down considerably, a person could see his sword carving figure 8s of various sizes out of the air on all 3 sides of him, while he took measured steps backwards, returning once again to the place where he'd started. As the last notes faded, he tossed his sword into the air and bent to pick up its sheath, and extended his arm just in time for the blade to slide in smoothly. "Come say hi to your daddy, Chris," he called, patting his thigh and bracing himself for the imminent impact. Crystal barked and then sprang away from the fence and came at him at a dead run, then launched herself the last 10 feet, flying through the air like a tumbleweed in a tornado. He caught her easily, despite still holding his sheathed sword in one hand. "I missed you, girl," he said, hugging her fiercely. Both hands being occupied left him no way to defend himself when she started trying to lick the skin off of his face and neck. He tolerated it for as long as he could, and then opened his arms and let her drop. "Why don't you go inside and find some Tic Tacs or something?" he asked, wiping his lips on his forearm. "Thank you for going and picking her up for me," Anvil said to Sharon and Amy, who were now close enough that he could talk without yelling. "It was Mama's idea," Amy said. "She said you didn't get much sleep last night and would probably be pretty tired." "That's what she said, huh?" Anvil asked, looking at Sharon with an eyebrow raised. "How considerate of her." Sharon was blushing furiously and looked everywhere but at him. "But you didn't look tired to me," Amy said, "jumping around and hacking with your sword. Hack, hack, slash, hack." Her actions were suiting her words as she hacked and slashed with an imaginary sword. "You have an awful lot of scars," she continued, circling him slowly and poking a finger at every one she could reach. She'd never seen him in shorts before, let alone shirtless. "This one must be where your bone poked through when you jumped off the roof carrying baby Micah. And that one must be the burn you got from the demon's sword when you fought for Arabeth's soul. And that one up there, I know where they came from," he interrupted. "Well, most of them anyway." She'd not been just looking at his scars, she was cataloging them, matching them up with the stories he'd told. Accurately, too. The little girl had a good memory. "Am I the only one that's hungry?" he asked. Sharon's slightly harried look was starting to worry him. "Why couldn't we see or hear your radio when we were still in our yard?" Amy asked, ignoring his question and still poking scars, though more slowly now. "Because I didn't want you to," he answered. "Now, who's hungry?" "That's not really," Amy started. "Crystal saw you," Sharon interrupted, ignoring the frown she got from her daughter. "She wouldn't even go around front." From harried to focused in 3 seconds. "There might be trouble." "Chris smelled me," he explained. "She couldn't see or hear me any more than you two could." "I can smell you too," Amy said, frowning and pinching her nose closed. "You need a shower." "True enough, Rugrat," he said, laughing and mussing up her hair. "Come on in. You two can wait in the library while I take a quick shower." He led them in the back door to the second door on the left, Crystal bringing up the rear. "Now," he said after the four of them had entered the room, "if you go to the end of this row, past a shelf with a bench at the end, turn left, and you'll see a little kitchen-like area. There's a coffee pot that just started brewing, and for you, my little munchkin, there's juice in the refrigerator." He looked to see if they were paying attention, and wasn't surprised to see both of them looking around in wonder. He had a lot of books. He was proud of his library. He caught Amy's shoulders as she finished turning around and knelt down in front of her. "It's very important that you stay in the library," he told her. "There are some things laying around that could hurt you. You can look at anything you want in here, though, okay?" She nodded her head gravely, looking a little scared. "I'll leave Chris in here with you. There's nothing to be afraid of, little one. I just never have company come in, so I just leave stuff laying around, that's all. There might be some cookies down that little kitchen," he continued, smiling at her. "You remember how to get there?" "Down there to that bench and turn left," she answered. "Exactly," he said, standing up. "There's also a bathroom in here, too, if you have to go," he added. "Just ask Crystal, and she can show you where it's at. I won't be gone long." He turned to leave and was stopped by Sharon grabbing his arm. This is impossible, you know, she said, gesturing all around her with a hand that didn't have a death grip on anvil. Your whole house isn't this big, and it doesn't have an upstairs. She was looking a little wide-eyed. You could clearly see a second floor to the library, railing and all. I do believe, he said with a rueful grin, that in the very near future, you'll learn just how overused that word is. For now, follow your daughter. Get some coffee. I stink, and I need to not. He transferred her hand from his arm to Amy's shoulder and went to take a shower. Impossible. The word made him want to puke. He couldn't count the number of times he'd heard it in his life. He'd have to watch his temper when talking to Sharon. Perhaps he should warn her first. He hated explaining himself. As long as she didn't try to force him into that happy crap, it should be cool. She wasn't an idiot, and should see reason quickly enough once it was crammed down her throat. You need to get in the hot tub and let me rub those beautiful shoulders of yours, said a voice from behind him. He didn't raise his head off the shower wall. Sounds great, he said, then sighed. But I don't have time. Let him wait. It's good for them. They take too much of your time anyway. Tolerance was not a big part of Marissa's emotional composition. They're scared and confused, Is, he explained. It's all my fault. So I gotta try my best to fix it. I know it's your fault, she agreed. I told you not to sleep with her. I always tell you. Do you listen? Shit, no. You think I'm just jealous. All I ever try to do is simplify your life for you, and you screw it up again. All for a piece of puss. Enough, Marissa, he barked, turning to face the misty form. I don't need a lecture. If you don't minimize the bitchin', I'll move to the Mojave and take sponge baths. I swear to Christ I will. If you don't like the way I'm running my life, piss off. I'm not making you be a part of it. Don't snap at me because your little chit has your panties in a bunch, she replied calmly. Besides, you know I don't piss. On or off. Forcibly expelling water from your body, voluntarily at that. It's barbaric behavior. You won't ever leave me either, so don't threaten. It makes you sound like a bully. Pretty sure of yourself, aren't you? He asked as he shut the water off. I'm sure of you, my love, she answered as the mist dissipated. He quickly dressed in his typical jeans and t-shirt and made his way back to the library. Might as well get this over with. I could look at anything I wanted in here, Amy was saying as he approached. I'm your mother, and I said not to mess with his stuff, Sharon retorted. It's really quite all right, he said reassuringly as he rounded the last aisle. I don't mind. Nothing in here can hurt her, or she it. If you really didn't mind, this wouldn't be the first time we've been in your house, Sharon said, pointedly not looking at him. If you really didn't mind, we wouldn't be stuck standing here for hours waiting for you. Is this really the direction you want this conversation to go, Sharon? He asked evenly. I know you're confused, and even a little frightened, but I'm still the same man you knew yesterday. And if you wish to be disrespectful, you're invited to get the hell out of my house. This was not going how he'd pictured it at all. He watched her internal struggle play out on her face. She nodded to herself when she reached a decision and opened her mouth. What's this thing for? Amy asked, oblivious to the tension in the room. She was holding up what looked like a sheet of glass about a foot square, with what looked like smoke swirling around in the middle of it, with a red dot dead center. That, my dearest child, Anvil said, kneeling down beside her, draping an arm over her little shoulder, as far as I can tell, is a memory imprinter. He smiled at her obvious lack of understanding. She was only 9 after all. It takes a picture of pages in a book and stores them in your brain, he explained, tapping a finger on her head at the end. Neat, Amy squealed. Can I try it? Huh? Please? Please, 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 please? If your mom says it's okay, he said, looking questioningly at Sharon. It's perfectly safe, he continued. Think of me what you will, but you know I'd never let her be hurt. Sharon stood staring at him consideringly for a few moments, and then nodded her head in acquiescence. Oh, thank you, Mommy. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Amy cried gleefully, running over to hug Sharon's leg. So how do you turn it on? She asked, running back over to where Anvil was standing, with a book now in his hand. You don't turn it on, sweetie, he explained. It just works all on its own. He set the book down on a desk. Now bring it here and lay it on top this cover. When she did as directed, the sheet glowed a soft blue, highlighting the title, Understanding Power, The Basics. Now, I want you to stare at the red dot until it goes away, and you can just see the cover. He continued. After just a couple of moments, he asked, Is the dot gone? When she said it was, he opened the book to a random page and placed the sheet back on it. Now, do the same thing again. Don't try to read the words, just focus on the dot. Gone? He asked again, and picked up the book when she nodded. I don't think it worked, Amy said sadly. I didn't feel anything magical. We'll see, he said with a wink, smiling at her. Now, in Understanding Power, the Basics, on page 273, what's the fifth word in the ninth line from the top? I don't know that word, Amy said, frowning with her eyes closed. I can spell it for you. It's R-E-T-R. Retribution. The word is retribution, honey, Sharon said from behind her, awe in her voice. Give us another word, she demanded anxiously. Anvil raised his eyebrows at her, but complied. A smaller word for the little princess, then. Let's see. Sixth word from the right, second to the last line. Over, they both blurted out at the same time, squealing delightedly at his confirmation and hugging each other like they just won the lotto. Let's do it again, Amy cried excitedly. How about not? Anvil said, closing and reshelving the book. How about, he continued, in response to Amy's broken-hearted sigh, how about you take this book, the title was Understanding, and do the same thing to every page. He set the book on the desk and picked up a smoky sphere that was sitting on the end of the hutch. Sit here, sweetie, and put this in your lap. She obligingly climbed into the chair and took the sphere from his hand and stared at the smoky center. There's a red dot in there, too, she said. What does this do? She asked, rotating the sphere and gazing into its heart with wonder. Do you remember the day we made your mom that cake? He asked, and then continued at her affirmation. You put the egg in and it just sat on top, didn't it? She nodded her agreement. Well, the sheet there is like the egg. It puts stuff in your head, but it just sits there on top. The sphere acts like a spoon and stirs it up so it becomes part of the whole. This is gonna stir up my brain? She asked, looking as though she would prefer that didn't happen. Not really, little one, he answered with a laugh. It just makes your brain think the new pages have always been there, like the spoon made the egg part of the cake mix. You want me to do the whole book? Amy asked, setting the sphere in her lap and pulling the chair closer to the desk. What are you and Mommy gonna do? Before you start, stare into the heart of the sphere until the red dot goes away, just like the sheet. Don't forget to start with the cover. Your mom and I'll just go over here and talk for a while, he told her, watching her stare intently at the sphere. I'm starving. Want some pizza? He asked. In a little while, maybe, she answered distantly, setting the sphere in her lap once more and picking up the imprinter. Come get me when it gets here, please. Then she was ignoring them. She had started. He frowned again, watching her, wondering if he'd done the right thing. Perhaps, he thought, I might want to consider the benefits of worrying before I do something. He snorted and shook his head. Too late now, anyway. Cats never like going back in the bag. Let's have some coffee, he said to Sharon as he slipped his hand into hers and guided her into the kitchenette. She'd been looking anxiously at the glazed look in Amy's eyes as the child processed the book. She's fine, he added soothingly. She squeezed his hand and allowed herself to be guided away from her daughter. Pour some coffee while I order dinner, he suggested, swiveling a Lazy Susan on the counter to reveal a computer terminal. He quickly submitted his order and joined Sharon at the table. So, what's on your mind? He asked as he sat down. She sat staring at him so long he thought he was going to have to repeat the question. I told you last night, she began. God, was it just last night? Anyway, I told you I loved you. She'd been looking in her cup, but now she was looking at him again. Nothing that happened today could change that. I thought for a minute that all of this, she waved her hand indicating everything around them, meant that I never really knew you. Then I watched you with Amy, and I saw that I was wrong. Since her hand wasn't waving around anymore, Crystal thought she should put it to good use and stuffed her head under Sharon's hand and wagged her tail. There seems to be much that I don't know about you, but the things that I do know are true. And that's all that matters. She drained her cup and smiled at him. But I suppose you could help a sister out and tell me what's going on here. I'll attempt to be brief, he started, holding out a hand to catch the coffee pot that was floating towards him. I was always a bright child. Gifted, they said. I learned in school that the average human only used 7% of their brain, and I couldn't help but wonder what the other 93% was for. I've also always been a big fan of fantasy novels. Dragons, knights, witches, and warlocks. You get the idea. She nodded that she did indeed get it, as she watched the coffee pot float back over to the counter. Well, I came to the understanding that the other 93% must have been used for psychic powers, ages ago, when mankind's acceptance of those powers was a given. As time passed, mankind forgot what he could do with the power of his mind, and those who did remember were hunted down as enemies of God. After that, no one really wanted to remember. Until you, Sharon prompted into the lengthening silence, as Anvil seemed lost in thought. What? He asked, startled. Oh yeah, until me. Nosy little old me. I never have been able to leave well enough alone, you know, he said with a wicked grin. I always had to poke my nose where it didn't belong. I needed to know. You see, I had to prove that I wasn't delusional, and as soon as I had the proof I was looking for, I no longer cared if people thought I was crazy. I learned, Sharon, he said as though talking to a memory. I learned more than I ever dreamed I could. I learned from anybody and anything I could. Sometimes the price was high. His mind wandered again briefly. But I paid. I paid. He'd not seen her get up, but somehow she was behind him now, rubbing his neck and making soothing sounds. And now, you're our friendly neighborhood sorcerer who likes to dance half naked in his backyard and steal the hearts of little girls? Sharon said in an attempt to lighten the mood. More like getting mine stolen, he said, reaching up to pat her hands on his neck. And not many would think that the word friendly and me belong in the same zip code. You're taking all this much better than I thought you would, he ended, tilting his head up to look at her. I'll probably freak out later, she admitted. Wouldn't want you to think I can't take it, she added, bending over to kiss his forehead. You can do what you can do. It's as simple as that. You can do it too. he said with a small smile. Her hands froze on his neck, and he saw her mouth the words to herself. Maybe I'll freak out now, she said weakly. She stumbled over to her chair and plopped down, eyes never leaving his, looking for the lie, or perhaps the joke. She found neither. How? She asked simply. Study, he said, waving his arm to indicate the library. She was fairly certain he'd expected her to freak, so she was trying hard not to. She didn't want to disappoint him in the least, even if it meant believing the unbelievable. He had that effect on her. She believed everything he said. She didn't always agree with him, but if he said it was fact, then it was fact. The other women she spoke to, her mother included, said that she was being weak or sucking up, but they didn't know the man across from her. She would love to see any one of them, or all of them together, stand up to him. He was a hard man. She'd seen that early on. Everything about him was unyielding. His eyes reminded her of ice blue diamonds most of the time. His stare made it feel like he was rooting around in your soul, and his perpetual frown told you he didn't like what he saw there. Those eyes did not welcome disobedience or dissension. Prompt compliance was not requested, it was required. Although it made him look like an asshole to most people, she found those eyes comforting. Those eyes told her that he had it under control, whatever it was. Nothing could surprise those eyes. As long as she was in his field of vision, she was safe. Those eyes that melted like butter whenever he looked at her daughter. If no other reason existed, she would love him for that alone. She'd never seen him even slightly upset at Amy. He answered all of her questions, played all of her silly games with her, helped her with her schoolwork, and told her stories whenever she asked. It was equally obvious that she thought the world of him, too. Her daughter spent more time on Anvil's porch than she ever did at home. Sharon didn't mind. Amy made him smile, made him relax. And she liked to see him smile, even if it rarely reached his eyes. She'd always hoped that one day, those eyes would smile for her. She watched him stand up and stretch, and was reminded that his eyes were not the only hard part of him. His body was layered with muscle, each layer harder than the one beneath it. She remembered how they twitched when she lay her hands on them, as though they were not used to being touched. She remembered feeling the power coiled in those muscles last night, and started to blush furiously. I'm going to go out front and get the pizza, he said, smiling at her as though he knew what she was thinking. He made a clicking sound with his tongue, and Crystal sprang to his side. Prompt compliance. We'll be back in a few. She smiled at his back as he walked away. Well, strutted off. He strutted all the time, kind of a half roll, half glide that just screamed that he hadn't had an ass whipping in a while. She didn't think he did it on purpose. Like his frown, it was just part of him. Like magic, wizardry, sorcery, whatever you wanted to call it. That was the big pill her mind didn't want to swallow. Yesterday, he was a quiet, undemanding neighbor who played with her daughter, refused her dinner invitations, and never turned down Dutch apple pie. Today, he was Merlin the Magnificent, who lived in a town inside of his house. This place was freaking huge, and she was just in the library. She got up and poured herself another cup of coffee and thought about how casually he'd made it float over to him. He'd said she could do it too. She believed him. He wouldn't have said it if it wasn't true. And there was the thing that Amy was doing. She'd done it with her daughter the first time, just to see what would happen. It had been amazing. If she closed her eyes, she could still read every word on that page. If a person were to do that to every book in here, they would be just like him, she finished aloud. Be just like who? The question came from right behind her, and she squeaked in surprise. whirling around to face him, coffee flying from the cup that had been in her hand before he startled her. "Jesus!" she yelled. "You scared the shit out of me." He ignored the fact that she was pounding on his chest with both fists as he grabbed her cup from the air above her left shoulder and delicately scooped the coffee out of the air around it. "Pizza's here," he said calmly, handing her back the cup full of coffee and displaying the 2 pizza boxes in his left hand. "Shall we go see if the little one's willing to grace us with her presence?" "You should wear bells or something," she muttered at his back as he set the boxes down. "Where's the fun in that?" he asked as he headed off to where they'd left Amy. "Besides," he continued, "I'm Indian. I'm racially obligated to sneak up on people. It's what we do." "Jerk," was the only response she could think of, and was rewarded by hearing him chuckle. "Your mother's calling me names again," he said as he approached the little girl at the desk. "She can be mean sometimes," Amy said. "I've ascertained as how she deals with inadequacy issues in certain circumstances." "Nobody likes a tattletale," Sharon began, and then gaped at her daughter. "What did you just say?" "The descent to rudimentary, uncomplimentary observations is clearly your way of responding to a set of circumstances you don't feel equipped to approach in a more reasonable fashion," Amy said as she closed the book and set the sphere and the imprint sheet on the desk. "Talk like a 9-year-old, Amy," Anvil said as he reshelved understanding and raised an eyebrow at the little girl as he picked up the dictionary and put it up as well. "Well, there were some words I didn't understand, so I read the dictionary before finishing understanding," Amy explained. "Sorry, Mommy," she continued, turning to Sharon. "All I meant was, you call him names when you can't think of anything else to say." "Did you read the whole thing?" Anvil asked. "Both of them," she replied. "Is pizza here? I'm famished." "What have you done to my baby girl?" Sharon asked, alarmed, grabbing Amy's shoulders and peering searchingly into her eyes. "Educated her," he responded, and then scooped the little girl up into his arms. "And swelled her little head up so much we're going to have to knock out a wall so we can get her to the kitchen." Amy giggled and wriggled around until she was looking at her mother over his shoulder. "Don't worry, Mother," she said hauntily. "Soon, you will be one of us." At this, they both burst out laughing hysterically as he carried her to the kitchen. "Jerks," Sharon said sullenly, following behind them, and smiled when Amy stuck her tongue out at her. Same old Amy. "You're all kinds of tough hiding behind him," she called to her daughter. "I am definitely not hiding behind anybody," Amy said imperiously. "I'm hiding in front of him." "Well, you have to go home sometime, Miss Smarty Pants," Sharon said, poking a finger toward the little girl. "Why?" Anvil asked, lowering Amy into a chair at the table. "Why what?" Sharon asked. She had stopped and stood staring intently at him. "Why do you have to go home?" he asked idly as he put a piece of pizza on a plate and handed it to Amy, who thanked him politely before tearing into it. "Close your mouth, you'll catch flies," he continued, not even looking at Sharon. "Dinner's getting cold." "It's where we live?" she said, snapping her mouth shut and sitting down. "It's where our stuff is?" she continued as she filled her plate. "Is that the best you can come up with?" Anvil asked before taking another bite, eyeing her across the table. They ate in relative silence. Amy and Anvil, of course, had to talk about the book she'd read and what was next. But it was sporadic conversation at best. Everybody more interested in eating than talking. Anvil glanced across at Sharon more than once. She'd not answered his question, and he didn't forget things like that. "So, which shall it be?" he asked as he leaned back in his chair, crossing his feet up on the table. "Home or here?" You saw Amy look hopefully at her mother, but the little girl said nothing. This wasn't her decision. Sharon was staring intently at him across the table as if trying to see if there was more than one question being asked. Amy won't sleep without the rose you gave her, she said, so we'll at least have to go. She trailed off as the rose appeared on the table in front of Amy, complete with the cheap vase that it had been in for the past year. She looked at him again, and he didn't even bother to smile at her. He was a man of absolutes. Yes or no. Any qualifying objection she might raise would be as abruptly satisfied. Here or home? It was not really a question this time. It was more a demand for an answer. Shall I eliminate the difference? He added, arching his eyebrows at her. He could see that she didn't completely understand at first, although he could tell by Amy's big smile that the little girl did. Perhaps it was the sheer delight on her daughter's face that drew back the curtains and let the light of understanding shine in. Or it could have been her willingness to throw caution to the wind. Here, she agreed. The hope shining in her eyes almost made him change his mind. Marissa would no doubt claim he was leading her on. He wasn't doing it intentionally. Some things just needed doing if other things were going to get done. This was a necessary part. If Sharon read more into his invitation, so be it. He told her that he had to leave, and soon. And he would leave. Nothing she could say or do would alter that fact. He had no desire to hurt either one of them, but he knew he would. He always did. Just another straw for the camel's back. He would be as hard as he had to be. Good, he said with a smile and a small amount of relief. She could have said home. It wasn't probable, but it was possible. And in his experience, women were really fond of doing the improbable. Now that we don't have to worry about that, he continued, I have to cover the basics with both of you. Before I do that, I need to know if both of you want to learn to do the things that I do. He saw Amy smile and open her mouth and held up a finger to stop her. Think about it carefully. Both of you. It sounds neat and fun, and it is, but it's also lonely. You have to hide what you can do from almost everyone, even your family. No one can know. Period. That may sound harsh, but as you learn, you'll understand. Amy, he said, directing his attention to the little girl, you won't be able to go to school anymore, and you'll have to learn to act like other girls your age. And you, he turned to face Sharon, will have to suffer fools in silence and cope with more problems than you can even imagine. It's not an easy life, but I can guarantee that you will find it rewarding in ways you can't even imagine yet. I want to learn, Amy said with no hesitation. I don't like the other kids in school anyway. They always make fun of me because I don't have a daddy like they do. It's his loss, sweetie, not yours, he said reassuringly. Don't worry about him anymore. One day, he'll repent his cowardice. He couldn't keep the chill out of his voice. You're gonna hurt him, aren't you? Amy asked. It wasn't really a question. Oh, yes. I surely am, little one, he admitted. A lot. He saw no benefit in lying to her. Retribution. Understanding power. The basics. Page 273, line 9, fifth word. He smiled at her when she just nodded her acceptance of the fact. The school's easy to take care of, Sharon said with an uneasy look at Amy. I just have to show proof of homeschooling, and if her performance earlier is any indication, it should be easy enough to convince anybody that she's progressing. Assuming you have all of the required subjects? He nodded to indicate that he did indeed. But it also means that I have to quit work and stay home with her. Don't give me the I'm not a baby look, Amy. It's the law. How am I supposed to afford not working? Count on Sharon to be practical. I have money, Anvil said simply. If it'll make you feel better about accepting it, then you can consider yourself employed as Amy's nanny. I'm expected to accept money for raising my own daughter? Sharon asked incredulously. That's absurd. Besides, how much money can you have? You don't even have a car. Wives have historically stayed home caring for their children. He saw her mouth the word wives and quickly continued. Since you have no husband to provide for you, then allow me to assume that responsibility. I don't have a car because I hate to drive, not lack of money. Just about stuck his foot in at that time. The responsibility of raising my child is mine. That may well be different if I had a husband, Sharon replied, emphasizing the word. But I don't, so there it is. I'm no one's responsibility. I've been taking care of us since I was 18. We aren't rich, but we've gotten by. She was a proud woman, and rightfully so. I don't mean to belittle your accomplishment, Sharon, he said with a touch of exasperation. You've done a remarkable job taking care of Amy. As you stated earlier, you have to stay home with her, and you'll need to study yourself. There's no option if you wish to learn. Believe me, money is inconsequential. That's easy to say for a single Sharon started. Stop, Anvil said. This had gone on long enough. Amy, finish your juice and hand me your glass. He extended his hand and practically yanked the glass from her hand as she held it out. What's this made out of? He asked Sharon, showing her the glass. Glass? She replied, confused and slightly taken aback by his mood swing. Melted sand, I guess? I don't really know how they make it. Is it? He asked, and then threw the glass down on the floor with all the strength in his arm, ignoring the squeals from the females. The glass bounced almost all the way to the ceiling, spraying the remnants of Amy's juice in a wild arc, and then hit the floor again and rolled under the table between Sharon's feet. She tentatively picked it up and examined it intently, Amy coming over to look at it too. It looks and feels like glass, she said, but no glass would have survived that. Unless you did something to it? They both looked questioningly at him. It's diamond, he said. Stunned, Sharon dropped the glass. He leaned forward and placed both hands on the table. There was a slight shimmer that radiated from where his hands touched and traveled throughout the grain pattern in the dark oak surface, and then down the legs. When the shimmer subsided, the table was as transparent as glass. Sharon's mouth was hanging open. Is that... she stammered, running her hand across the now glittering surface of the table. Diamond as well, Anvil finished for her. Or, if you prefer... The table shimmered again. This time, the end result was the unmistakable sheen of pure gold. Pretty, Amy exclaimed, popping up and down and clapping her hands excitedly. Can you make it red? For you, little one, I can do even better, he said, smiling at her. This time he closed his eyes, and the shimmer became a glow. It's beautiful, Amy said as the glow faded. She climbed into a chair to get a better view of the tabletop. It was every shade of red that existed. Radiating from the center of the table was a rose in full flower, represented in such three-dimensional detail that Sharon had to run her hand across the surface to see if it was still smooth, and Amy hopped off her chair to peer under the table, as if searching for the rest of it. Thank you, Anvil said. It's ruby now, in case you were curious, he added for Sharon's benefit. Any further observations about my material worth? He inquired. How? This just can't be, she added, bewildered. Chemistry and physics, he answered. To simplify it to a degree that you can comprehend right now, once you learn to see what something's made of, it's fairly simple to rearrange its components to suit your needs. Think of it as alchemy on steroids. He could see that neither one of them understood. Big surprise there. Okay, he continued. This is what a diamond looks like on an atomic level. He created a model in the air above the table. And this is what a ruby looks like. Another model appeared right beside the first. Do you see the difference? He asked. When they nodded, he continued, so you can see what you have to add or remove to change one into the other. If objects are enough alike, all you have to do is arrange things a little differently. Other times you have to take parts from something else in order to complete the transition. And the more times you create or alter a specific substance, the easier it becomes. So, you see everything like that? Sharon asked, indicating the diagrams in the air above the table. Not all the time, he answered. It's a skill I learned some time ago. It requires a great deal of focus, and it'll make your eyes hurt like a son of a bitch if you do it for too long. Can I do it? Amy asked hopefully. Not yet, he answered, but it won't take as long as you might think to learn, he added in response to her crestfallen look. Your journey's just begun, sweetie. There are all kinds of cool things you'll learn to do before you try messing with molecules. Probably a lot of books to read, too, she pouted. Indeed, he agreed. Speaking of which, he continued, on my desk, there's a journal labeled Inventory. If y'all are going to live here, you both need to read it. It has a comprehensive list of all of my odd possessions, along with descriptions of what they do. That way, you'll be safe to wander around. Incoming voice message, announced a voice from the speakers overhead. Play message, Anvil said, holding his hand up to stop Sharon from talking. Voice print authorization, Waterwalker. Passcode, endgame. He sat back down and Amy climbed into his lap. I'll be wanting to tell you now, said a different voice through the speaker, that it would be taking no small amount of courage to be sending me an email. An email, mind you, not even the courtesy of a voicemail for one who served you so well for so long. An email titled Final Instruction Set. He smiled at the familiar Irish accent. Don't you be thinking for one bloody minute that I'll be letting that go. You damn well better be delivering your final instructions to my face, you broad-shouldered lout. I'll not do it, I tell you. Not one thing on that list will I do. Dagon and Lilith are both having a fit. They think you're dying. You're not, are you? Sweet mother of Jesus, tell me you're not. Lilith won't stop crying. If you can't come see her, at least talk to her. We'll be waiting here, doing not a damn thing until you straighten this out. Well now, Anvil said, tugging on Amy's ponytail. She didn't sound pleased with me at all, did she? Not even a little bit, Amy agreed, tugging on his ponytail in turn and grinning at him. Who was that? Sharon asked. And what was all that voice print and passcode business? Sounds like secret agent stuff. That was Eileen. She takes care of things for me, he replied. As for the other, I require a rather sophisticated security system in order to maintain my anonymity. There was definitely an unfriendly glint in Sharon's eyes, a glint that asked what kind of things Eileen took care of. I suppose I should introduce you to her, he told Sharon. While your mom and I talk to Eileen, Princess, why don't you go read my inventory so that I don't have to lock you in a cage when I leave the house? Lilith? The blind girl from your story, right? Amy asked. The one who's as old as me? Is Eileen her mama? She is indeed, Miss Smarty Pants. Now, off you go, or it's a cage for you. He swatted at her bottom as she scooted off his lap and stuck her tongue out at him. When I'm done with Eileen, if your mom will let us, we'll go get some ice cream, he promised. Like she would ever say no to you, Amy said, rolling her eyes. But I would be honored to accompany you in an excursion to partake of frozen bovine lactations. She giggled with delight as she pranced over to sit at his desk to resume her studies. Now that's going to take some getting used to, Sharon said with a sardonic smile. Now I have to read the damn dictionary. She sighed with regret. Well, if you accompany me to the computer room, we can get Eileen on the horn, and you can watch me get an ass chewing, Anvil told her with a grin. That might make you feel better.